start the meeting. Thank you. First of all, welcome to everybody. I note that Councillor Ainsley is here as a substitute for Councillor Bull this evening. Just cover some admin matters before we get started. First of all, we've got a fairly busy agenda this evening. So I'd ask you to, when you're asking any questions or making any comments, to be brief and to the point. And please, I'd ask also that you mute when not talking, and raise your hand, your virtual hand that is, if you can, or wave frantically if you can't wave your virtual hand, and we'll try and note it. I'm sure Mr. Delaney will help me on that point if you see somebody, but I'll take them in order as per the participants list. Just one minor point. I have had a chat with Mr. Delaney about the protocol for addressing each other, and since this is a formal meeting, we should be calling each other councillors, so it'll be Councillor Waller, Councillor Hemsley, and not the normal names I use for those individuals. That was humour. So thank you for that. Before we start, I'd just like to ask Carol Snell to comment on the two members of staff that she's got with us this evening. We just meant to explain that for us, Carol. I know we've discussed it before, but for other members of the committee.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this evening I've invited Jen Holmes and Duran Collins to sit in on the meeting. So Jen joined us in July. She's our HR manager, so works closely with us, particularly on lead for recruitment, wellbeing, equality and diversity. And Duran Collins is our HR advisor. Duran's been with us for about 2.5 years now, and leads on most of our employee relations issues. So I thought it was useful for them to sit in on the meeting, so they can also see, where their work and their contribution to certain items within the HR service goes through the system and the process. And I think it's useful to hear members' perspective on some of those. So thank you for letting them sit in for the evening, and I'm sure they will enjoy it. Obviously, I'll ask them tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you.
Look forward to feedback. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us this evening. Right, moving on to the substance of the agenda. Apologies.
Apologies from Councillor Ken Ball, Chair, who, as you've set out, is substituted by Councillor Ainsley this evening.
Thank you. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Have we any declarations of interest this evening? None been notified. Thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting. These have previously been issued, and members will have seen these. Are you happy that they're a true record of the meeting we held on the 7th of July? Thank you. Okay, thank you. Just one minor point on it. I know we don't do matters arising, but there was an item relating to terms of reference. I don't know if that's been actually forwarded to the Constitutional Working Review Group, or at least to the through the governance team. If that has happened, do we know?
That, Chair, is expected to be on the agenda for the next CRWG meeting.
Excellent, thank you. That's perfect. Petitions, deputations, and questions. Have we any?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Questions from members. Have we any questions from members?
None received, Chair.
Item 6, notices of motion. Any notices of motion?
None received, Chair.
Good. Item 7, appointment of vice chair. We haven't had a vice chair for the last meeting or for this meeting. We're required to appoint a vice chair. Have there any proposals for vice chair? Silence. Okay. Can I propose Councillor Powell as the vice chair? Would that be acceptable to members?
I see that Councillor Powell has just raised her hand, Chair.
No, she's
sorry. Councillor Waller raised her hand. Sorry.
Thank you.
I was merely going to say, if there's nobody wanting to do it, I'm prepared to, on the grounds that I sit on East Midlands Council's Regional Employers Board, so do have quite a lot of involvement in this area of activity. But if Councillor Powell wants to be vice chair, I'm more than happy to support her.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you. I'm happy, Councillor Waller, if you'd like to do it.
Okay. So I presume Councillor Powell is proposing Councillor Waller.
Yeah.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Waller? Councillor Dale. Are there any other nominations? No, being no other nominations. Councillor Powell, as Councillor Waller is our Vice Chair. Thank you. Look forward to working with you, Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I look forward to working with you and with Mrs. Snell as well.
Excellent, thank you. Next item on the agenda is gender pay gap. This is a report from Mrs. Snell. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. You'll see in the gender pay gap report that you have before you, this is our latest set of data based on 31st of March 1921. So this is our fifth reporting period. As before, the gender pay gap looks at the median and the mean hourly rates of men and women. It's not the difference in pay between men and women for doing the same job. Paragraph 3 therefore shows the percentage for each of the reporting periods. So I would again just remind you that the median is the middle value when all are arranged in numerical order, and median is the average. So many of you on this committee that have been on this committee for the last few years will have seen the previous report, so much of this will be quite familiar with you. That you can see from this year's reporting data that it does show a further reduction in the difference in average pay. I think the 11.3% figure of 2019, I think a reflection could well have been attributed to the fact that we had a new pay scale in 2019, and that particularly had quite a significant increase, particularly at the lower level of grade points. Paragraph 3.3 shows the quartile comparisons between 2020 and 21. And these figures are quite significant and actually quite a contributory factor to our overall percentage median and mean. And of note, and one of the key determinations is where the average is going to be in the largest increase in male staff in the upper pay quartile. So it is sufficient if you look at those increases between 20 and 21 for those numbers and for those salaries to make the sort of difference that we're looking at in our overall average figures. Paragraph 4 provides a little bit more commentary, and again reaffirms our previous assessment of factors that do affect the difference, in particular the quartiles as just mentioned, but also turnover and recruitment, as we've identified before, where new staff may join us and where they're appointed to on the scale point compared to leavers, and also where you may have a difference in appointments between male and female as well. So there's also a little bit of comparisons to other organisations. Other organisations aren't quite as advanced as us in publishing their March 21 data. So this paragraph does relate to comparator information for 19 and 20. And again, you can see the fluctuations across authorities. Some are quite varied and some of them are minor variances. But in comparison, again, to ourselves, it is quite difficult to compare organisations with gender pay gap because the workforces, again, do tend to vary quite considerably. So some of the large authorities, for example, will have some of their in-house trade functions, whereas we don't. So there is quite a difference in the makeup of the workforce, again, which affects a lot of the data. I think also, again, just to reassure you as before that in HR, we are involved end-to-end with recruitment, and we are therefore 100% confident that we advertise all jobs at the evaluated grade. The appointment is made in accordance with that grade and in accordance with our pay policy. So just to reaffirm again previous comments that we've made, that we are across all of the appointment process and the salaries that are offered to new employees, so that managers would not be able to go rogue if they so tried to. We would identify it and pick it up pretty quickly. So it is a set of data. As I said, it is a data set that we have to run every year. I think we're quite used to running the data set now. I think we've got quite confident and comfortable in how we run the data, and we're confident in how we assess that and whether it's likely to be drawing our attention to any particular issues that we should be focusing on in terms of differences in pay. So happy to take any further comments or observations.
Okay. I've got Councillor Ainsley first of all.
Thank you very much, Chair. gender is defined by the Equality and Human Rights Commission as the way in which an individual identifies with a gender category. I'm sorry for repeating that, but I just thought it's necessary. So my question is that although I suspect that the number of individuals who identify as non-binary or transgender is likely to be small, how are these umbrella terms catered for when calculating the gender pay gap?
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. The legislation surrounding gender pay gap hasn't addressed that at this point in time. So the requirements on us are only to report on male or female in the way that individuals has identified to ourselves. So there is currently no other provision to run any further data sets on those that might define themselves in an alternative way. Now, whether we see any variation in that over the next year or so, obviously we will keep an eye on it. But it's a very relevant point.
Okay, thank you. So at the moment, there's no requirement, so we don't do it.
No.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ainsley. Did I see a hand momentarily up from Councillor Waller? No, I just saw the hand coming up. Okay. I saw that. Councillor Powell, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick question. Obviously, the split between male and female is predominantly female workforce. Is that quite a reflective split across other local authorities? Is that fairly typical?
I would say no, not particularly. Again, depending on the type of workforce that those organisations have. I think ours is fairly typical of a workforce that doesn't have a lot of the trade functions within the organisation, which we know are typically generally male-dominated type of roles. So if you look at our workforce, we have a large number of staff that are in the community support and some community care functions, and that typically is a female-dominated type of role in the way that some other trade functions are male-dominated. So it really very much does depend on your workforce and the type of roles that you have within it.
Okay. Sorry, what did you say? Trade functions? What
trades? So, for example, craft workers, refuse services.
Oh, right. Okay.
Maintenance, housing maintenance functions. Yeah, okay. Those sort of. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from colleagues? Can I just ask a question to some extent and make a comment? Clearly, this is a very statistical piece of work. And I just wonder, one of the statistics that I just wonder whether it's relevant, and that is the service of leavers, because we have, I think we talked later about a 13% turnover of staff. Now, if we're having a higher turnover of female staff, for example, then male staff would be staying on longer and going through the scales, whereas female staff be coming in and cycling through those. And I just wonder if there's any relationship that you're aware of that would, if that is the case or not.
But we do run the data by length of service. And when we looked at the leavers within the first couple of years, that initially looked quite high in proportion to leavers with more service. But actually, when we drilled into that, we could see that they tended to be in roles that had been initially fixed term or casual. So I would say from the data we looked at, I did look at the data with the view to, is it significant and worthy of reporting in this paper, but it really wasn't drawing anything to my attention that I felt would need to be drawn to your attention, or providing any other context behind the leaver data. So we do look at it. It's part of the data set we look at. Similarly, we look at leavers by disability and by BAME as well, to see if we can see, is there more of something happening in one area compared to another, and is there no real explanation to that other than that there might be an issue of concern. Okay, that's fine, thank you. I wonder if there was any information on that. The other question I had was about Peterborough City Council. They seem to be best of the rest, as it were. What are they doing differently from all the others? It's so significant different from virtually every other authority in the area. But I don't know. I've not looked in any of their particular reports or their data. And I think what is also interesting, I think you're right, they've perhaps been more consistent in their outturn figures. But also, I think Leicester City Council, with such significantly low figures. I'm perhaps more drawn to why they are 0 and 0.9% and have been 0.1%. So I think, yes, I think it would be worthy at some point for my own interest to perhaps look at some of their further reporting in terms of how they explain those figures. It's a shame that the local government workforce figures aren't yet available for 2020. That we were given some leeway in terms of reporting data. I did find some other national data this week, but again, I've seen two different figures for the gender pay gap for the whole of the UK. The labour force survey quotes it at 15.5, and another report that I've seen by another data set organisation was at 13.6. So say it is a set of data that can be quite complex to really get behind and understand. But yes, I think, yeah, Peterborough would be worth looking at, as would be Leicester City, I think. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you. No other comments or questions? Thank you. Thank you for that, Snell. Can we move on to the next item, which is future ways of working? Again, for you to comment on.
Thank
To
you.
lead in on. Thank you.
Yeah, in July 21, we did quite a detailed report to Employment Committee that was really sharing with you our journey since March 20, particularly our ways of working and the arrangements that we'd put in place. It certainly was a very unprecedented development and pretty much evolved as we went along, I think it's fair to say. And I think also fair to say it's totally against an approach we would normally take when considering such a wide-scale organisational change. That sort of programme would have been months in the making, really, but hence we seem to be able to move to a completely different way of working pretty quickly. Excuse me. So where are we at in October 21? We still have a high percentage of staff working at home or combining working from home and being in the office. As we know, many of our staff work within the community and have continued to do so all the way through the last period. Catmus is now available as a working space again, now that the vaccination centre has moved out. So we're at where we're at because staff have said this model seems to really work well. They feel and comment that they feel they are productive and have certainly improved their work-life balance. Our services have been running just as well. And again, some view would be that that is actually better than it was previously. I think we do feel we've established a bit of a rhythm and way of working, again, partly because we had to, but it seems to have become a natural way of how people can balance their work and their life and their lifestyle in particular. Systems and technology have held up really well, which I think we may have initially been quite surprised at, but obviously we're very thankful to, apart from the odd days when the system does seem to fail us. We have rolled out wellbeing programs across the last 18 months, and they've really helped and supported staff to keep well. And we've put together support packages for managers in terms of how they can manage and support their staff in a remote working environment. So we've done a lot of consultation, we've done a lot of engagement with the workforce, and we've received overwhelming view that people want to continue with some remote working, hence the hybrid model, which allows staff, if the service can support it, to carry out some of their work from home and also carry out some of their work from the office. We've known also that that hasn't suited everyone. So additionally, if people want to come back in the office because they need to come and work from the office because they really don't like working from home, then they are able to do so. And also we are seeing for some teams to run effectively, they do need more collaboration amongst their team peer colleagues. So we are finding some of those teams are coming back into the building a little bit more frequently. So from the beginning of October, we have started the trial of a hybrid model. So it is very, very early days. We set up a task and finish group, which Dawn Godfrey has led on. And that's enabled us to focus on the key components that we needed to ensure the building was ready to be able to support more people coming back into the working environment if they so needed to or wished to. So that included how the office was laid out, use of furniture, use of IT kit and use of equipment. So we have a draft framework in place, the content of which, again, we shared at the last Employment and Appeals Committee. We've held some drop-in sessions for managers so that we can talk about any emerging issues or questions that managers may have. We also pick up discussions and updates at all staff briefings. And we've got an extended leadership team meeting on Monday. And again, we'll pick up at that meeting some feedback from managers in particular. And we will be running a pulse survey. So a pulse survey is more of a short survey rather than an extensive survey. A short pulse survey towards the end of November to get some initial feedback and comments from staff as to how they feel it's going. So it is early days. I said literally we started the trial 3 weeks ago. The last couple of weeks has been half term. So to be fair, we haven't seen a great deal of increase in occupancy or frequency of use of the building. So it does remain pretty low currently. But more data will emerge over the next few weeks. The property services team are monitoring the attendance within the building on a daily basis in terms of frequency and levels and so forth. So within this phase, we will monitor the usage as part of the space utilisation study. As I said, we'll carry out the pulse survey towards the end of November. We'll pick up some further feedback from managers and through our extended leadership team. We're developing the scope for the review of this phase, which will fundamentally ask two questions. Do we carry on with the hybrid model or do we revert back to previous ways of working? So there'll be a very targeted range of questions and processes as part of that review to understand and evidence as far as we can whether we consider it as a workable model for the council and for our services or whether it just doesn't work. As certainly our feeling based on the last 18 months and hence while we're trialling is that we have been able to make it work. We need to look at the consequences and implications of both of those options. If we're to carry on, is there more that we need to do, that we need to put in place to support that? And similarly, if we did revert back, what consequences and impact would that have on our staff group as well? Our property strategy obviously will emerge from that because the key question in terms of an underutilised Catmus site will need to be addressed. We'll start to look at policy and contractual issues, which again we've raised here before. So for example, are there elements of our employment contract that we need to amend and change, or are existing policies sufficiently flexible to see us through? So for example, within our contracts currently, we refer to location, core hours, working patterns, toil, flexi, travel, that type of thing. Are any of those affected by the hybrid model or whatever emerges? And equally, use of technology has to continue to stand up and support how we can operate. And again, are there other opportunities that will facilitate and support that? So currently we continue to monitor say how much is going on in the building. We also continue to look at NHS and government guidance and regulations on safe working practices to ensure that whatever we develop is in line with latest advice. So that's where we are at the moment. I think we said we would keep this item on the Employment Committee agenda for the foreseeable so that at each meeting I can give you an incremental update of where we're at.
Good. Thank you very much for that. First question I think is from Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding 3.10 and the parking charges. And it just kind of looks to the officers who need to be office-based for the organisation. Are we then disadvantaging them by them having to pay parking as opposed to those officers who maybe can work from home full time? Obviously, they are being financially disadvantaged if they don't so much have a choice.
Yeah, I mean, charging for parking is something that we have always done as a council. We do provide a discounted rate from the rate that the public would charge. And it has been one of the issues in terms of discussion points. What do we do with parking going forward? And given that we do charge the public to park and it is an income revenue stream for the council, the decision was that we would retain car park charges. We will review it as part of this phase one is quite an important point, because it's a comment I'm sure you're aware, and hence you've raised it, that staff have raised as well, as you'd expect them to. But currently the decision is that the parking charges are back in place. We'll review it as part of phase 1, but we have to consider it in the light of the fact that it's also part of an income stream.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you. 2 questions. One's a bit more of a comment, and I know we discussed this at the last meeting about the needs of the business. And I know many businesses now, I'm just concerned that, and I appreciate this is an update, not the final policy by any means, about, it's very gentle on the language, must meet the needs of the business if the service requires it. I'm concerned that actually managers have enough support from whatever we decide on, that actually if they require their team members to come in for a team meeting, that they've got enough weight behind what they're requiring. I know many businesses are saying, you know, you must come in 2 days in 10 or something like that, because yeah, and that's maybe something to make sure with the senior management team, that is, it feels a bit light on that side of the expectations to me. And I appreciate people can work effectively from home, but there is I think there can be a bit of a drift. And obviously if you get new people in post doing the same, I mean, I know from businesses I've known, you know, suddenly you find somebody's decided to live in Scotland and decides not to come into the office at all. So I just feel that maybe there needs to be a strengthen on that side of it, obviously subject, you know, at least to discuss it from the manager level. My other point was just about, you talked about safe working practices and health and safety of people at home. How far do our responsibilities extend? You know, obviously seeing people working at kitchen tables and perhaps not in the best postures. I don't know, is that part of the remit, and how far we can actually, how much our responsibility extends to that, and providing appropriate equipment and etc.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Councillor Powell. Shall I just make a comment on your first point? And obviously it's a point that our managers have raised as well, because they have felt very much they need that sort of corporate position and framework in order for them to operate within. I would say we've got that to a good place, I think, in terms of understanding. And I base that on the briefings that we have done with managers and the comments and discussions we've had. And also our draft framework itself does make that point very clear, that the way of working is agreed between the employee and the manager. Now, I'm not going to say that there haven't been some cases where it has felt and appeared that the individual has wanted to drive that decision and not wanted to take due regard to the needs of the service and the business. So again, at times we have needed to support managers in terms of making that point very clear to those employees. So I think it's something we need to continue on, but I would say, and I think Mark, the Chief Exec, would also make the same viewpoint, that we have been quite strong in terms of the needs of the business, and certainly we would support managers. So that would come through either, if it is an HR intervention, or supportive message from a director or Chief Executive. In terms of safe working practices, yes, in terms of safe working practice at home, that has been a significant factor from the start. We put in DSC, the display screen equipment risk assessments for all staff, very quickly after we moved staff to working from home where they could. Now, there were some individuals where, as you say, in terms of providing, or them able to provide a safe and appropriate working environment at home, that was not possible. So in those instances, those individuals were supported and enabled to come back and work safely from the office. Because you're quite right, some people just do not have an appropriate facility at home in order for them to work effectively and safely. So some of those did come back into the building. And then we reran those display screen equipment risk assessments 6 months later. And they will be revisited again as part of our ongoing risk assessments. And again, our framework document does make that point quite clear, that working in a hybrid way, and therefore carrying out some of your work at home, is predicated on the basis that, for example, you are able to access systems and networks through an appropriate broadband structure, and that your DSC and any other health and safety requirements is appropriate for home working, and that you can provide appropriate kit and equipment or facility in order to work safely at home. So I think you're absolutely right. And there's no way as an employer we could enable somebody or support somebody or allow somebody to be working from home when that environment is not appropriately safe or effective for them to work.
Okay, thank you. If you're happy with that response, Councillor Powell? Okay, thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I do have a few questions, specific questions on this paper, which I would crave your indulgence to ask at some point, please. But I'll make a general comment first, leading on from what others have said, and specifically what Councillor Harvey said. As we're going forward, if we are moving to this hybrid model, I would like us to consider what impact this will have on employees beyond the positives. Some of the impacts could potentially be negative as well. And I wasn't thinking about the psychological loneliness type issues, which I know you're aware of. I was thinking more of the practicalities of what impact will it have on their tax liabilities? What impact will it have on their own personal bills if they're having to heat their homes during the winter rather than come into the office during the day? That type of thing. And are we likely to want to consider providing allowances, for example? The reason I started with tax, of course, is that some of these things are tax deductible. But I would like us to consider all of those issues in the round as well, please, so that if the unions start jumping up and down, and I am aware they are talking about these things, that we are prepared and not caught on the hop, partly because I'd like to see us as a competent authority, but partly actually from the point of view of our workforce, we need to have thought through all these issues. So that's my sort of general comment on it. And when others have finished, I'll come back to my specific questions, if I may, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ainsley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure whether this is an observation or a question, actually. It's just the fact that I know that I work with a director of children's services, that there have been significant changes in the way of working for some of the social care elements. And I worry slightly that with the home working culture, it's going to be tremendously difficult or a lot harder to actually implement changes to the way we work, and perhaps with the induction process and others, if we are remote working. So, and the cross-pollination of ideas, which is actually vital, isn't it? Very, very important point. So I think this goes back to a point raised earlier by Councillor Powell, in that are you confident that our managers will be able to direct things such that if they implement a change of culture, or they wanted to encourage more cross-pollination and were to drop below the averages or the expectations of employees to work from home, that would be possible to bring them in collectively to actually achieve those aims?
Yes, I do have some confidence in that, Councillor Ainsley, but equally, you know, we're not going to be too complacent about it. And I think I mentioned earlier on about some programs that we've run for managers to help in terms of thinking about how you engender a team ethos, culture, ways of working, when you're not necessarily also engaged quite so frequently in the way that we were before. Having said that, that doesn't mean to say what we had before was perfectly okay. You know, sometimes it wasn't. So, and those are programs that we're continuing with, and we're looking at developing some coaching skills and coaching programs. The points that you make, you know, are very relevant. I think, you know, does hit into the fact that, you know, people do still need and crave some of that engagement and collaboration with people. I think there's very few people that say, no, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me at all. You know, most say, actually, I do need some of that. And what we're seeing is people are finding that and achieving that in a slightly different way. So within the HR team, you know, we don't all work in the same office every day. and somebody like Jen, who's new to the organisation and also our HR trainee, hasn't worked in that office with all of us there at all. And we recognise the things that you sort of miss out a little bit by not having that, conversations across the office, chatter between individuals, building some relationships and so forth, is quite different. And we're all finding different ways of doing that. And, we're quite pleased to see how teams are adapting and doing that within their own service areas. And it's quite interesting to hear and share amongst peers and colleagues, what they're doing. Some of them, one of the team said to me the other day, they have a croissant Tuesday, they all come in on a Tuesday and have some breakfast and chatter together in a way that, in a less formal way that they probably never did before. So actually their relationships are slightly different because their engagement is different. And I think, we're still learning and we're still doing more of that. And I think that's where, again, the building needs to be constructed and designed in such a way that helps us do that a little bit less formally within the building. So I think our confidence is growing. Like any other organisation, we'll learn and develop and evolve. That's what's quite exciting about it, because we're seeing things move in slightly different directions, which is quite nice. And I think relationships and contacts are, are very different, but in a good way.
Can I just very briefly come back on that, Chair?
Yes, briefly.
Yeah, I think actually, home working is a very positive thing. I just do worry that how we keep track of the loss of social interaction when we think about ways of working. And I think it's the tracking and the process that's necessary to actually make sure that we do keep our eye on that ball, that and developing the draft framework so that we can actually make sure we are still supporting all those softer sides of working. But thank you.
Yeah, I think that's very relevant. Just finally on that, Chair, and I think your comments there and comments that Councillor Waller mentioned a little while ago, I think there's some things in there that I want to expand in terms of our pulse survey that we do, that perhaps does touch in a little bit more than what I've already done in terms of the relationships and the engagement aspect. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll ask my specific questions now. I'll ask a couple and then come back if that's all right, Carol. Paragraph 2.2, you have highlighted for us the positives of home working or hybrid working, to be more accurate, but you haven't indicated any negatives. And I'm sure there are some. And in fact, you've touched on one tonight, that some people don't have the right environment to work from home. But when you come back to us in future with a similar report, I'd like to know what the negatives are, because I'd like to be able to think what we can do to mitigate some of them, please. So actually, that's an observation. Again, apologies, it wasn't a question. But the question is in 3.1. If I'm reading this correctly, the table, we seem to have a significant increase in the other category in September 21. I was just wondering why that was.
It was the point of time that I think we had an extortionate number of people on annual leave. So it's
Fine, thank you.
But I can't set maternity leave because that might indicate we'd had a significant increase in employees. So, but there's certainly we hit a bit of a peak holiday period in that one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Going forward again, when we have another version of this report, please, under financial implications, I would like a little bit more detail about what there may or may not be the costs. And it isn't just IT. I mean, if we get to the point in the future, and unlike Paul, I don't think it's a good thing, home working, but then neither do I think it's a bad thing. I think it's a neutral, it's just a way of working. And if we get to the point in the future where we want to encourage more people to do it, we may have to provide more equipment, appropriate chairs, for example, to prevent back problems. So I'd like a bit more detail, because I think that is or needs to be part of our consideration, because we don't want to end up saving on the one hand, but then spending a lot more on the other. So that's just a request, please. And similarly, in paragraph 11, when you talk about emissions, if you're going to include that as a positive, that we've got fewer people going by car, I would want more detail, because they're not increasing emissions if they're using an electric car. They're not increasing emissions if their commute is walking, cycling. I don't even know how many would use a bus, for example. And I think it's just too crude a measure to actually help us do any sort of thoughtful changes to our policies. And finally, given that if we do make a change, this isn't going to be a short term, it's going to be a long term, I would like to review regularly. I'm picking up on something I think that Paul said about what the Americans call the water cooler moments, the chat that enables you to be creative. And I fully understand that. One of the things that I found as somebody who was a hybrid worker, well, I was home-based, but went into the office now and again, was that the longer I worked for the organization, notwithstanding the fact that we did meet physically and we met via video conferencing, the longer we were working that way, the less we were talking to each other and the less we were being creative. And I'm talking over a 10-year period here. I'm not talking a few months. Hence my request that we review regularly, and the regularly may be every other year. I'm not saying frequently. And that's all I want to say. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor Waller. Any other questions at this stage? Don't mind if I can come in with a couple of points. I think Councillor Waller picked up one of mine, and that was the issue on paragraph 3.1 and well, there's a decrease in home working. I just wonder whether the number on leave was actually the group that were home working at that point in time, just were on leave. So it'd be interesting. Have you any anecdotal evidence in October? Of course, we got half term there as well, which doesn't help. But any anecdotal evidence that we're maybe back to 50% plus working from home?
No, I would say we're not at that level. I think we are still much higher than that in terms of working at home. We run the data every month, but as you say, the October data, again, the date that we have, because it aligns with the data set that we have to report to the LGA, has hit the half-term period again. So, you know, November might be indicative. Obviously, December then won't be because everybody will be trying to do Christmas. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But we do track the data every month.
Yeah. We shall monitor that at future meetings. So thank you for that. A couple of other minor points. In paragraph 3.8, the drop-in sessions by managers, was that well attended? Was it across the board, or was it particular directorates?
Yeah, no, it was across the board in terms of directorate spread. And I think we had about 12 on each session. So yeah, a good number of people and individuals that I'd like to see there in terms of perhaps those that have got larger service areas. So yeah, really very varied. But as I said, we've got extended leadership team on Monday, which is pretty much everybody that sits on a DMT. So we'll be running a similar discussion and feedback session then as well.
Okay, excellent. And then finally, it's the one issue that, as probably most people would know, I'd raised, and that's the issue of performance management. You know, actually achieving the results on a day-to-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis. And it's much easier when you're in an office and you can see what people are actually doing and hear what they're doing. It's much more difficult when they're remote. And I just wonder how we're coping with that performance management. Not you know, your quarterly or annual performance management, but the day-to-day performance management of output by individuals. You know, take a planner, for example, you know, completing planning applications or similar. I just wonder, it's not really mentioned in this report, but it's something which, you know, I feel quite strongly about.
Yeah, and I would say that our one-to-one system, our My Conversation model that we have has evolved in that sense quite naturally into some more specifics around how somebody is doing and what they are achieving. So again, some of the workshops that we did had a particular focus on goal setting and objective setting. particularly when you're not necessarily observing that. I mean, not a lot of managers, you know, were necessarily in the same room as their staff, and certainly if they are, they're not sitting there watching and observing what they're doing. What you can pick up in an office environment are things around behaviours and so forth. You know, the level of attention they need to give in terms of, is somebody doing what you need them to do, is not so vastly different when somebody is at home compared to when they are in the office. But I think it does tighten up, I think in a very useful way, and perhaps in a way that we needed to do anyway, and has been quite useful, is about being clear about objectives and some goal setting. That can be done at those discussions, and then those discussions review how those progress items are moving on. So, you know, from our point of view, you know, in HR, are we dealing with a lot of capability issues with staff that are not performing? No, we're not. Now, you may say, well, the negative to that is people aren't telling you, or they're not managing it, so how would they know? So it's not coming forward. I think I would say from our experience, I'm sure Jen and Duran would agree, we know our managers well enough and know that when things are not going well, they tell us, actually. So, I think we would be far more aware if there were some significant performance issues that, well, as you say, where perhaps people aren't doing quite as much as what they needed to do. Okay, good.
And I think to some extent I agree with Councillor Ains and Councillor Waller in respect of that communication, the sort of watercolour moment, or in fact the sort of Tom Peters approach of managing by walking about, you know, and just you know, talking to people and seeing what's going on. Finally, thank you for that report. That's very helpful. Thank you. I don't think there's any other points, but can I remind members that in fact you have the opportunity to complete your DSE as well, your display assessments. And I'm sure you all have done. Okay, some embarrassing looks there. Right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is staff retention.
Chair, can I very quickly come back with a point that come up as a result of something you said earlier on about performance management, if I may? Yes. This is a paranoid observation. I absolutely accept that. But when people are working remotely, it's remarkably easy to snoop using keyboard presses and the like. And I just think that's something that we need to keep an eye on. I just think it's a lot easier when people are remote working. And I'm not saying for 1 second this happens, but there is a possibility that snooping under the guise of performance management can easily happen as you monitor key presses, etc., etc., etc. And I think that's more likely, or not possible. It's more possible, let's put it that way, more possible when you are remote working. I just wanted to make that rather paranoid observation, and I do accept that. Noted,
Councillor Ainsley. I think we'll move on for that particular one. Good, thank you. Next item, item 10 on the agenda, staff retention. This is an item that we raised last meeting, particularly the background being, of course, that we were experiencing and are experiencing in some departments quite a bit of churn of staff, which has impacted in the performance of those departments. And there's some good examples of that. You know, we know in the issue around SIL and the management of SIL over a 3-year period, we had such a high number of movements of staff that had an impact on the performance of that area. So it was an area that we asked Carol to look at for us. So Carol, would you like to just discuss the report, and we'll then move forward. Thank you.
Yes, yes. I mean, the paper is titled retention, but a lot of the content is really about how we recruit, because we need people here in order to retain them. And I do recall us saying also at a previous meeting that you know, recruitment we thought was going to be quite interesting to observe over the forthcoming year, but I think I'd safely say it's not materialised quite as I had anticipated. And I think, you know, we're seeing nationally that there's a huge number of vacancies, and across all sectors they're increasingly talking about difficulties in recruiting. So I'm not quite sure. Well, I think I know where some of the candidates have gone, but not all of them. So what I've tried to illustrate in this paper, really, it is exceptionally hard. You know, I'm not going to present to you that we are in an absolutely positive position in terms of recruitment in particular. It certainly is very hard. And it's hard in areas that we haven't necessarily experienced or anticipated before. So, you know, we can look at our turnover and you can look at the statistics and you'd think, oh, well, that doesn't look, you know, too bad. It's not, you know, particularly gone sky high over the last year. It's not particularly horrendously bad in a similar sector. What we don't know is whether a pandemic year has had any impact on people holding on to jobs, not wanting to move off. You know, we just don't know that. When we do drill into some of the detail into some of the teams, we do see a bit of variation and some higher figures in some service areas. But because a lot of our teams are so small, the percentage figures start to look a bit distorted, because if you have a small number of leavers, obviously in a small team, it's, you know, it's a high percentage. So it's very difficult to present any data across teams. Because of our size, we know where things are. We know where people are leaving and we know where we're recruiting. So I don't need to keep running data to know where some of those issues are. We do it to support and to check. And every vacancy that occurs, no matter what team, we treat that with the same level of scrutiny and rigour. You know, how we go about approaching that vacancy does vary quite considerably, depending then on those complexities of the service area. We've also reflected quite a lot on our local context in terms of what is so different about Rutland and how do we need to design our own attraction and marketing. We do aim to go out to market just the once. We don't want to be multiple advertising the same type of job, but we are certainly seeing lower levels of responses across a lot of our positions. And quite often we have needed to extend the closing date to see if just buying a little bit more time might enable us to capture for more candidates. And in some cases it does, but it's not the definitive strategy to adopt just by extending the closing date. You know, recruiting managers want their candidates and they want them now. We do try to manage expectations and reinforce to managers that they really need to invest time in the whole process. So we look at the whole process of recruitment as opposed to just taking each component. You know, certainly talk to them about how we're going to go to market, how we're going to engage, how we're going to assess. And some of that dialogue with managers is again about raising their understanding about potential cost of advertising in some media. I would certainly say we do experience some kickback in terms of not really wanting to spend too much money on advertising. Appreciate budgets are tight, but for some roles, for some parts of the market that we need to go to, you know, there is a cost attached to that. Having said that, our advertising costs are exceptionally low. And you can see from the report that in the most, we do recruit quite quickly, but again, it's 1% figure across a whole number of posts. So there's some that take longer and some that are that much quicker. But I would say again, you know, given the increasing challenges, I think we can expect those figures to change. Paragraph 5 in the report provides some further information about what we do and what we continue to review and flex. And certainly some of the key changes and developments is around marketing and advertising. Most of it is now digital and through use of social media. And we purchase some packages with certain deals and arrangements, which gives us coverage across a range of job boards and recruitment websites. So we don't just buy individual job boards. We make sure that we can cover a package across quite a range. Certainly, you know, we just talked about hybrid and flexible ways of working, and flexible working is certainly the golden message in marketing and advertising. And I would say without it, we would certainly be significantly reducing the chances of us recruiting. We've got a couple of specialist roles in particular that we recruited last year. And the only candidate that we wanted to appoint in both cases, you know, lives further afield and not within the region. So if we had said, you know, this is a 5-day-a-week in the office, then we wouldn't have filled those roles. So I think we need to see, as much as we talk about, you know, potentially some of the disadvantages of our workforce, that there is a very golden line into ability to recruit going forward. There's no doubt about that. Approach and speed is the biggie. We're certainly seeing, in terms of candidates' expectations, filling in an application form is often quite prohibitive for some people. They just, just don't want to be bothered to do it. So, we're looking at ways of how we can engage a little bit quickly with people, entice them in, get them interested, and then get them into the system. So shorter applications, for example, that just gathers some initial vital key information that enables us to get into a better dialogue with them. Assessment process, again, we're having some good success here we're not doing just an interview in a lot of our areas. So we are encouraging and seeing more engagement between the recruiting manager and their candidates. Just a bit of better dialogue. I think that helps establish expectations of working for Rutland and what we've got to offer. And importantly, the right fit and the match to our values, it is significant. It's not just about their technical and professional skills. They need to be the right person for us and for the team. And again, that needs line manager and recruiting manager investment. And as I said, we're seeing some increase in willingness to do that, and that's proving really effective. Onboarding and induction, again, is different than before because it is more virtual. As we said, there's less meeting of colleagues and building relationships. So, new recruits do still need to be able to operate within their team. So they do need to have that engagement. And again, our experience with recruiting Jen and Hannah, we made sure we booked together time within the office, both on a one-to-one basis and with the rest of the team. So we were fortunate in terms of we were coming out of lockdown, so it was quite permissible to start meeting up in small groups, socially distanced and safely. So we were able to do that, and I think that's played a big part in terms of how we've incorporated them into the team. Hopefully, Jen and Hannah will support that view. I'm sure they will. But I think it does mean, though, as we said before, individuals do need to be able to work independently. If hybrid is the way of working going forward, and that's what people want to do, as you say, there is a need that you need to be able to work as part of the team, but you do need to be able to work effectively and productively at home independently, so that these concerns and Miss Councillor Ainsley's observations that people might be hiding under the radar a little bit, people have a stronger ethos in terms of their approach to work. As we know, recruitment is a corporate priority, and it's a priority for the HR team. We talk about it extensively. But equally, as I said at the start, retaining staff once we've recruited them is important. We will naturally have some turnover and people will move on. But again, we're seeing some good successes in some of the initiatives that we've put in place, and there's some things that we want to develop. Certainly putting some career grades in our planning and building surveying teams has significantly helped. And in fact, we were able to appoint some trainees into those roles so they can see their career progression and career trajectory, and that certainly has made a difference. The apprenticeships is certainly have gained some momentum, I would say, over the last few months. I know we talked about some concerns at this meeting about the apprenticeship programme before, but I think that's gaining some momentum again, both in terms of the numbers and the quality. We are looking after people. The key thing is, in terms of why do people want to stay working for Rutland? We want you to stay working for Rutland because you want to be here and you think it's great. So we have to work at that and put something behind it so people feel that it can be the place that they want to be. So I think helping people stay, with Rutland because it's great and because they see it that way, is part of our challenge as well. So as I said at the start, I'm not saying that we have everything perfect. We do have turnover. We do have some difficult to recruit to areas. We've got some things in place. There's some things we want to improve on and put in place to help improve our chances, but it is a very difficult recruitment market at the minute. That is certainly supported by colleagues in the local government sector as well, across other functions as well. So again, happy to take any other observations and comments.
Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. A couple of things, Carol. The first is in relation to what is written in 3.3, I note that only one individual referred to the challenges they'd faced in starting a new role, but nevertheless, I wonder, did we have any learning from that that's changed the way we might approach a new starter? Because I'm thinking back to our last meeting and the very valid point Councillor Harvey made about how we should be looking to provide apprenticeship opportunities for care leavers. I think there may be some new to work candidates who might find being self-starters and home-based more difficult than some who've had experience of working that way before. And I wonder what lessons we might have learned. That's the first question. And the second is, on the recruitment side, the issue of filling in long and complicated application forms certainly resonated with me. And an awful lot of people nowadays have their CVs already. Do we take CVs instead of application forms to encourage people to apply to us? And my final point isn't a question, it's a statement. East Midlands Council's Employers Board is looking at retention at its next meeting. And I'm well aware that Carol is very well linked into the officer side of employment within the East Midlands. So hopefully, if anything useful comes out of it, we will take that on board as well. Thank you. That's all. 2 questions and a statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Waller. Yeah, shall I take that in reverse? Yes, that would be very useful to get some further feedback from the board. That would be very helpful. In terms of the second part about taking CVs, yes, we do. So candidates apply through us through what's called an applicant tracking system, which I think I may have presented to you when we first implemented it a couple of years ago. So you can fill in the form or you can attach a CV. So yes, that certainly does help. One of the other things we're looking at is for some of our roles, particularly community support workers or some of their lower graded roles, is to have, again, a shorter application process for them to complete. But yes, lengthy applications are just, not what people want to do. Where you can literally go onto, a website like Indeed and just load a CV in seconds, and your job's then mined out all over the place. You don't want to fill in anything else. And then your first point about new starters and the learning from that. Yes, and again, I keep referring to Jen and Hannah, so apologies to Jen in particular, she's here. But in a way, it's been quite useful having 2 new starters within the HR team, because we can use our own experiences and our own learning to inform what we should be designing and supporting the rest of the organisation to do effectively, particularly for new starters. So we do a lot of our what we call onboarding through our learning management system, and then we can provide some of the induction journey through that as well. But it often feels that there's just no face-to-face contact within that, either over a screen or collectively within a group. So I'm just looking at what Councillor Sam Harvey is doing over there. Apologies.
I'm so sorry. I'm just trying to move him. Is a Labrador wanting a cuddle? I'm sorry. 40 kilos wants a cuddle.
We'll welcome him to Employment Committee. But I think that there are things we need to learn from how we have been bringing new people in and how we should be bringing them in going forward, whether they are based in the office, completely home working, or doing hybrid. And it's interesting, we've started to collect some information very recently from some other local authorities, and that, again, there's some quite innovative and creative approaches that they're adopting. But certainly we are seeing the establishment of some face-to-face contact, in different shapes and formats is certainly quite a common feature. Certainly some of them, and some of our examples that we've seen, is again on somebody's on their first day, actually their whole team do come into the office, so they do meet on that first day. So we quite like that idea. So we're certainly not there yet, and not as far forward as we would like to have been by now, I think, in terms of induction of new staff. But the ideas and the intentions are there. We just need to crack on and and put some of those into place over the next few months.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Ola, any other questions from other colleagues? No questions. Can I just comment on the paper? Thank you very much for the paper, Carol. In fact, thank you for all 3 papers tonight. They've all been very useful. The one thing is on the retention side, and I think I'm delighted that the East Midlands Board is covering that. I think, to me, the expensive part of employment is recruiting people. It takes time, effort, money to do that. It's much better if we can retain people, particularly good people. And I'm just wondering if there's issues around our salary structures or similar our terms of employment. Forgetting the hours of work, but because we've got hybrid now, and that's slightly different. But is there anything around there that we're seeing that we're drifting away from other authorities or even other employers, in the private sector, where we take people from the private sector? So those 2 questions there: salary structures and terms and conditions.
Yeah, and I think some of that I've covered in, the Rutland experience, without going into detail in terms of pay structures and terms and conditions comparators, because you're often comparing apples with oranges, and you're not necessarily on the level playing field. Obviously, we're on the national pay structure, which we're going to come and talk about in a moment. And we do quite a lot of salary benchmarking, either for specific roles or every couple of years we do a salary benchmarking across our senior officer salary structure. I think the paragraph 4.3 does focus on the specific Rutland challenges because of who we are, where we are, and what we are is a factor. And we have to acknowledge those as significant factors because we would never recruit otherwise. So yes, as we've said there, for some roles, our pay level would be lower than what might be considered a comparable role or a similar role in another authority or in another sector. And that is more prevalent at that senior level. So our senior leadership roles have a significant breadth to them in terms of their service function and portfolio of services compared to what you would find in a larger authority. And that's pretty consistent, I would say, particularly for our DMT type of roles. So they become a challenge. But that's why we created the senior officer pay structure, which was about 4 or 5 years ago. And that certainly had a significant impact. So I'd say we certainly every 2 years do a salary comparator model on that. I think the bit about, sometimes less scope to move around, as we've said, is a reality, which means, again, somebody is perhaps more likely then to move on to that broader role, a narrower role, but with a depth of experience and perhaps of a larger scale becomes more attractive than a broad operational role within Rutland, even though it might be at a senior level. So, I think our structure and way of working is what it is because of the shape and size and the service breadth that we have compared to a larger authority. And I think the other area in particular that I would just say is another bullet point that I mentioned was that some of our roles here are what we might consider to be single roles, where you just have one person in that role covering, again, a breadth of activities, which in another organisation would be a team. Health and safety is a good example. We have one health and safety advisor, and there's some other functions within our children's social care teams where you have one person focusing on a particular area of that service, which again in a large authority would be supported by a team. So I think the answer, Gordon, is yes, they are those issues. And what we do in looking at any particular post that we have are what are the factors for that role, but we're looking for a way to depict that in a very positive and encouraging way so that we can entice people to apply for it. We need to get them in the door, and then we can demonstrate much more effectively what a great place this can be to work. As of interest, just a comparison, our strategic director for places, Penny Sharp, has recently been briefing some agencies regarding some heads of service roles in the places directorate. And obviously, she wants to give a very positive and encouraging view of Rutland and the role, because there is a phenomenal amount to sell within that. But she has to bring some realism into that so that those candidates coming forward do appreciate and understanding that these are huge roles. and that the breadth of them can be much broader than they may have experienced. That's certainly the feedback we've had from other interims, for example, Martin Brown, Steve Sprayson, for example. So, their feedback has been quite useful in that process as well.
Okay, good, thank you. That's useful. You mentioned the salary comparator model that you build. Is that due in the next few months or?
Yes, yeah, it's due this year. It's due this year.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's due sometime this year.
It'd be interesting, I'm sure, for colleagues to have a feel for where we stand generally on that.
Yes.
So that maybe when we come to the end and we look at our work plan, we can put that into the work plan potentially if colleagues want to do that. Right, thank you. I don't think there's any other questions or comments on this item. So can we move on to the next item, which is my papers here. Item 11, which is National Pay Award. I'm sure it says.
Correct.
Carol, would you like to pick that one up again, please?
Yeah, this is a verbal update. The reason that I didn't do a paper is that I would have written it about 3 weeks ago and it would have been out of date. So that's why I think we agreed when we spoke, Councillor Brown, that we would just do the verbal update. So as you're aware, we are part of the National Joint Council for Local Government Pay Bargaining Terms and Conditions, and that means we operate off the national pay spine, and we can only apply an award that is agreed by national employers and the recognised trade unions. The pay award's applicable on 1st of April each year, and the negotiations start in good time and early in the previous year to give time for those negotiations. And over the last few years, last year was a little bit late, but we've pretty much been able to get a pay award in for the 1st of April. Obviously that hasn't happened this year. The process includes a rounds of regional briefings with local authorities, so there's opportunity to contribute views and perspectives and to enable national employers to manage those consultations. So as Councillor Waller's mentioned, I'm on the HR group with East Midland Councils, and I believe, Councillor Waller, you contribute and would take part in the meetings from the member perspective as well within the region. So we certainly have opportunity to input our perspective to those discussions, and we do as well. So for 2021, where have we got to? Well, as I said, we don't have an agreed pay award for 1st of April 21. The unions lodged a pay claim back in February 21, and that there was a range of demands attached to that, and in particular, a 10% increase on all pay points. Other demands included home working allowance, reduction in the working week to 35 hours with no loss of pay, increase in annual leave, mental health support programs, review of job descriptions and career development for school support staff, and a review of the national provision for maternity, paternity, shared parental leave and adoption leave. So it was a very comprehensive set of demands. Obviously that was rejected. And I think we can all see that that package and that level of increase would just not be affordable. In July, national employers submitted a final offer of 2.75% on pay point 1, which would take that to £9.50 an hour, and 1.75% on all other pay points. And for staff on the chief executive and chief officer's pay structure, the final offer is 1.5%. During September, the unions consulted their members on the offer by employers, and that was voted very unanimously to reject the offer. So the unions have advised us that they are now preparing to ballot their members on taking industrial action. National employers have affirmed that is a final offer. And they've advised the unions that they will not be reopening any negotiations. And national employers have also confirmed on behalf of local authorities that there is no prospect of that offer being increased. Now, we can still hope that the unions may accept, but I don't think there's a great feeling of confidence in that, to be honest. So where does that leave us? Well, clearly, very disappointed that we haven't been able to give a pay award at all to our staff, which I don't think we would disagree at all, is very well deserved, and it is so substantially late. And I think the challenge now, given the timing, is that we're not going to get an agreement for an April 22 award, given that we would normally have started those negotiations by now. The unions have made messages that this will threaten services, and particularly those that were very central to the pandemic response. They do seem to still think that the government might come up with some additional funding. But again, I don't think there's a great deal of confidence that that is going to happen. I think some of the other bits to add to the challenge, obviously, is the NHS did get 3% this year. We've heard this week that the public sector freeze will end next year, so there is going to be an expectation across other parts of the public sector that there will be an increase of some description next year. The national living wage, again, has been announced this week that will increase to £9.50 on the 1st of April 22. So we're going to have to do something with the current pay points 1 and 2, because they are currently under £9.50. So if there is still this stalemate come April 22, any staff on pay point 1 and 2 will have to move to £9.50. Now, from our point of view, that is not a significant issue, as we only have one employee on pay point 1, and that's a casual cleaner, and we don't have anybody on pay point 2. So that issue alone is not an issue for us. What it does do, though, if you have your lower pay point as £9.50, your next pay point is £9.62. So the issue does start to kick in terms of differentials between individuals that are on a different pay point and maybe even a different grade, because it's into the next grade area, but their pay difference is so minimal. Industrial action, is it going to happen? Isn't there? Who knows? We understand that the ballot will take place in the next month or so. They have to go some to get an agreement through a ballot for industrial action. You have to have, I think, at least 50% of those that are entitled to vote have to vote. And then you have to hit a very high threshold of those that do vote in order to get the industrial action over the line. Will the union's members go for it? It's difficult, isn't it? You might think on the one hand, everybody's had such a difficult time, recognition that people should get a pay award and it should be more. You can see that there could be some good support to go for it. I think that is quite a possibility for this one. The last strike action we had was 2014, so a substantial number of years ago. So I think we have to work on the basis it's possible they might get it over the line to take the strike action. We don't, as I say, yet know when the ballot will be. They do need to give us notice of when the ballot will take place, and then the unions have to notify us as soon as they practically can after the ballot whether it's going ahead to strike action. And then they need to notify us when they are proposing to take that strike action. Whether that will be before Christmas, I don't know. I think it's getting a little bit tight, to be honest, but they might see that Christmas time, they may feel would cause perhaps maximum disruption. So I think, we have to work on the basis there is a bit of a threat to industrial action because the unions are talking about it. They may get it over the line. Will that have such a significant impact on us? Does that present us with risks going forward in some of our service areas? Well, clearly, if you took a large number of staff out of some of those service areas, clearly it would. As I said, our last strike action was in 2014. We had about 37 staff who went out on strike in 2014. It's not a significant number. Clearly, it depends on which service areas that comes from. If you took a few social workers out, then that has an impact. The however factor to that is what we have been successful in doing previously, and again, we would try it again this time, is to talk to the unions about some exemptions. So we would have a conversation with them on the basis of protecting key services, and particularly vulnerable service users, whether we could agree some exemptions to some roles out of the strike action. I say in the past, they have been quite willing to do that with us. I can't guarantee they would do it again, but we would certainly have those early dialogues with them. Also, once we know if the strike action is going ahead, we do kick in some discussions with our managers across the organisation to start to identify where we might see some potential risks if we were to lose staff through strike action. I think 2014 is too far, ago to say that we'd anticipate a same sort of numbers. I don't think we can say that. I think the circumstances are quite different, but we would certainly start looking at whether we needed to put any contingency arrangements in place should some of our services be hit by staff being out on strike. So once we've got those timelines from the unions and where that's going, we will put that process in place. I think just a reminder, obviously if individuals do take strike action, they don't receive pay for that day, and also they do lose service for that day as well. Now, in some cases that can be quite prohibitive for some people in terms of actually then going out on strike, but it still means they may take part in the ballot. So I believe that's where we're at the minute. Obviously, as things develop and move on, we've kept staff informed, we keep our managers informed. We've certainly briefed staff that unfortunately we're not able to confirm a pay award for April 21 as yet, and that equally we're disappointed in that.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of colleagues? Any comments at this stage? So watching brief, I think, in the meantime, watch this space. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be interesting to see how that develops over the next month or so. The implications for the I noted that tonight, I think it was the idea of an increase next year for public sector employees, but I think it was also stated that there'd be no additional monies either for the authorities or the organisations involved. So that's not actually terribly helpful in the circumstances. Good, thank you. Thank you for the report on that. It was very useful. Thank you. Next item is item 12 on the agenda. Now, I put this in to help us start to build a programme of work or programme of issues that we may want to address in coming weeks and months. We already have the future ways of working in place. I think, Carol, you raised the grievance policy as being something we want to look at as well. We've got the apprenticeship strategy, which we've already agreed to cover. So those are items we've already got. And there's some further policies which are coming up during next year. Flexible working, obviously, will be one once we've been through the various phases, and the umbrella leave policy, which I'm interested to hear a little bit more about in due course. Are there any other issues that colleagues feel strongly they wish to raise, or do you want to think about it and contact myself or Councillor Waller in the interim over the next month or so? Councillor Waller.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think depending on what happens with the union's ballots, that we may need to revisit the pay award issues in respect of what impact it might have on service delivery. As I say, depending on the outcome of the ballots, just to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts at this stage? If you haven't, it's no desperation to cover it tonight, but if you'd like to contact myself or Councillor Waller in the next 4 to 6 weeks before we sit down on the next agenda setting meeting, then that would be very beneficial if there are issues you feel that are important. But we've certainly got for the next meeting in February, the future ways of working, grievance policy, as certainly items we will definitely be covering. Okay, right. Thank you for that. And finally, I've not been advised of any other urgent business. So I'd like to thank you all for attending this evening. Thank you, Carol, in particular, for the presentations and the reports you provided. Very extensive, very useful. Thank you very much indeed. So safe journey home, everyone. And we shall see you in due course. Okay,
Thanks,
thank you.
everybody. Take
Good night,
care.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good
Good
night.
everyone.
And
Good
thank
night.
you, Carol. That was very good. Thank you.